Biometrics are a set of technologies that use measurable characteristics. So some way you can extract something from the body. You can take a photograph, or you can take a print. But the most important thing, at least for me, is that it's subject to mathematical extraction. So you can compare the thing you've taken a picture of with very large numbers of other examples, and that lets you make a case about when we say something is biometrically identified. What we're saying is that you can claim unique identity out of very large populations. ID that is authenticated using usually their fingerprints or an iris print, and that ID becomes the basis on which firms like banks allocate credit and then score people. Biometric capitalism is a form of the economy where that is the dominant form of asset. So what distinguishes African economies from just about everybody else is that colonial rule made private property very difficult, in fact impossible, I would say. It does exist in some cities, but mostly informally. States basically denied people the instruments for establishing private property. And so biometric capitalism is a system of biographical credit allocation that's built up, and without all these other forms of property that we associate with capitalism. Other countries have other existing systems. They have reliable forms of land titling, property titling, birth registration, marriage, death registration. All of these, there's a kind of world of paperwork that people use to establish who they are. The reason that biometric capitalism is flourishing on the continent is really because, on the African continent, is because the other institutions that would normally take or have a role in establishing people's reputations, their names, and their assets, those things don't exist. The form of biometric ID is typically the only reliable form in which people can establish who they are. So banks come to rely on it very heavily. Banks, lenders, and states rely on it very heavily because they don't trust the other forms of ID that exist. The benefits really are that, for some states, what happens is that now the large proportions of the population are participating in the economy. They're available, if you like, to be exploited, and they can generate surpluses that can be taxed. A bigger benefit really has been in the building of infrastructure. So that the fundamental problem of African economies has been really weak, broken down infrastructures. And what biometric systems do is they basically reward states that build, not states, firms that build particularly mobile phone infrastructures. Those firms can become very profitable. The key point is not so much that the data is a risk. This is not Google or Facebook, where their massive data centers are collecting huge amounts of data about people. It's a very simple test. It's usually a very small little string that's attached to each person, and that quite often is all the state knows. The state might know, a little more, your name, your ID number, maybe your place of birth, those kinds of questions, but there's not a lot of data actually in the biometric database. And there's a risk there that, essentially we're creating a new form of hierarchy that will make very small numbers of people very wealthy, and they have very little benefit actually for the large numbers of people who use these systems. So I've called that the danger of presidentialism, because the president's family is often the key set of beneficiaries of a system like this. Scoring system is built on top of it or to the side, and it interacts with the biometric database. The scoring system is usually owned by a large profitable firm. In South Africa, the firm is called Net1. In Kenya, it's Safaricom. And that firm, because it's a monopoly and it controls most of what's going on in the mobile finance economy, it's in a position to really make an enormous amount of money and to exclude lots of other firms. So but that is the biometrics and the credit scoring probably need to be kept separately. It's the state that collects information about people's biometrics, typically, and then the firms that do the credit scoring. I would say that in general, the information that the firms have got is a lot less than is normal in the credit scoring systems that exist in the West. Most, the big firms that collect information about credit behavior in the wealthy economies know a lot more about what their customers are doing, what the credit users are doing than these firms know. And it's a very simple test. It's lend, don't lend. It's very difficult for large numbers of people because they're being subject to these, if you like, discipline of debt in a way that wasn't true before. So if you don't meet your payments, you can be denied access to your phone. You can be essentially denied access to all your, all the assets and resources that you've built up over time. So in a way, I think it's both a tremendous asset and a benefit, and it is really making these economies grow more quickly than they were before, and it's bringing in more people than was the case before. But it's also imposing a really quite a difficult burden of debt management on large numbers of people. Because it's systematic and machine-based, it's very difficult for people to appeal to anyone. It's hard to find exemptions. Most of these economies, they don't have, if somebody makes a mistake or you feel like you've had a calamity in your life and you can't make the payments, there's no institution you can appeal to that will give you relief from the way in which these credit systems work. Really large numbers of people on the African continent are being fingerprinted, and really large numbers of people in India have been fingerprinted. Most of the countries where it's possible for a political party to articulate its opposition to coercive ID, people tend to say, thanks, we like that. One of the reasons why fingerprints work well is that they captured very precisely, and it's that very precise imprint that allows them to be reliable indicators. You get a really high, like 1 in 10,000 error rate, whereas for most of the other biometrics, the error rate is much higher. It's like it's close to 10 in 100. When they say there's biometrics on the passport or biometrics on the ID, is a one-to-many match, but it's a one-to-one match, which is it's very difficult to exploit or use for it. You can't ask who is this person. You can only say, is this person who they say they are? Rather than seeing the tool as a burden on welfare payments, it is also possible to see it as an enabler. It is something that makes new forms of welfare possible that didn't exist before. There are examples in South Africa in particular where the state welfare payment was also being used by the private provider of the cash. People were getting cash payments. It was also being used to pay for airtime for the phone and funeral policies and insurance and lending to those people. But generally speaking, that isn't the model yet. I think there will be more direct cash payments because I think it's a much cheaper way for donors, NGOs, people who have money and feel bad about the poverty that exists in the world. I think it'll be easy for them to use these tools to distribute their payments. This is something we all need to stop. We need to be thinking about the connections between people in Spain and people in Egypt or in Uganda, because they are connected, actually.